They call them Gacha games. Games that rely on your inability to be patient and force you to grind through the game in order to level up. And as a newcomer to the genre, Genshin Impact seems to be the game that really started this whole gacha game craze of the past few years. But not like live service games didn't exist before, with plenty of microtransactions like Destiny and Anthem. But unlike Destiny and Anthem, where you had to pay to play the game, the new craze is making the games free to play just to get you hooked on the game before they can unload on you all of their microtransactions. But if I understand it correctly, the gacha part of a gacha game is that the microtransactions are random, like a lottery system or a loot box, a la Overwatch or Battlefield 2. Wasn't this a huge issue a few years back? Didn't entire governments get involved saying that loot boxes are like gambling? That it was bad for kids because of deceptive practices? And yet, even now, we have gacha games with loot boxes. And these companies are looting their customers all the way to the bank. I'm not sure if you have to buy the loot boxes, or pools as it's called in these games, but they do force you to grind, and grind, and grind for weeks just to have a chance at getting something in the game that you actually want. At least this was the impression that I had from all the videos about these kinds of games. As if you were going to be stonewalled by the game unless you buy or grind for these loot boxes. So I was really put off on the whole genre. The most I ever wanted to get near that system was Overwatch, and I never had to pay to get loot boxes in that game anyway. Well, until they changed it in Overwatch 2. Needless to say, I quit Overwatch when they did that. But I was always curious about Genshin Impact, the incredible artwork, the exciting combat, and the lore building that it seemed to have. Much like Destiny or any good MMO, they really entice you with the story. They make you want to check it out. But unlike an MMO, you don't have to pay for the gacha games. So why the hesitation in trying out these games? Well, much like I've wanted to get into Destiny, I thought that I was just too late. Too late to get into the game or the story. And no one likes to start at level 1 when everyone else is at level 100. And what if I actually like the game? Would I be like all the rest of the gacha and MMO players, playing way too much of one game, neglecting all other responsibilities? So I thought. But when the first Ascendant finally released this past week, I thought, you know what, let's try this out. I'll finally know what all the fuss is about with these types of games. After all, I did like Borderlands, and what little I played of Anthem. And as the first Ascendant is geared towards looter shooters, it seemed like a perfect game to get into the free-to-play live service gacha game. I'll be on the ground floor with everyone else. So I played the first chapter of the first Ascendant. You can watch my gameplay on my streaming channel, Media Rebel Live. And it was a fun first few hours. But after a while, the repetitiveness started to creep in. And while I did enjoy the gameplay loop, the story just wasn't enough to keep me motivated. It all started to feel like busy work. And I couldn't help comparing the game to other games. A little bit of Destiny, a little bit of Anthem, and even a little bit of Halo Infinite. The live service genre really is formulaic, and if not done well, can get really stale really fast. Bombarded with menu screens upon menu screens, I was completely overwhelmed. Little did I know that the ridiculous menu screens are a staple of the genre. But maybe I should have known. Every live service or free-to-play game is basically like this too. I tried for years to get into Fortnite, but the menu system there is so confusing, with little to no rhyme or reason, all the events just thrown out there. And so I just stopped caring. It's the same with multiverses and Overwatch 2. There's just too many menus, which is fine as it gives you options, but I like games that are straight to the point, and having to read everything in order to do anything, wasting a half hour figuring out the menu screens, is not my cup of tea. Which is ironic, because RPGs are also filled with menu screens, and I have no problem getting into it to level up my characters. So maybe the problem isn't the menu screens. It's not a problem with the game, but my expectations of the game. Since these games are designed to be grindfests, you are expected to be in the game a long time, and to take your time, I'm ready to accept this with an RPG, but when I see fast gameplay like the First Descendant, or even Wuthering Waves and Zenless Zone Zero, then I just want to get in there and play. I'm expecting everything to be quick. Overwatch 2 is probably better in that regards, as you just press one button and you're into the game. You don't have to navigate multiple menus just to play the game, or to level up your characters. It's very fast. You get in, you play the game, and you're out. And that's the gameplay loop. And so while I enjoyed what I played of the First Descendant, I didn't feel like keeping up with it. Much like Destiny or any looter shooter, the game is much more fun with friends. But even then, I just didn't care to grind. It just all felt pointless. The story was just meandering along, slowly dragging on. As you fight against the mythical Greg and his glorious orbs. And when you're done with that, you go back to the hub world and then fight a Colossus. And then when you're done with that, you go back and do the same little missions over and over again. This was the loop that felt very familiar from Destiny and Anthem. Go here, shoot this, defend that, rinse and repeat. With barely any story moving you along. And not a lot of character development in between. And while I don't know if this issue is fixed in Destiny now, since there seems to be a lot of lore in that game now, it just wasn't here in the First Descendant. I appreciate that the game just came out, and it'll probably get better. I'm told that Warframe was like this as well when it first started, but I didn't play Warframe either, and really I'm not going to go play it now. So if the game, even if it is free to play, doesn't pull me in from the start, then I'm not going to wait around years for it to get better. It's on to the next one. So when the advertisements came out for Zenless Zone Zero and Wuthering Waves, it really got my attention the way that Genshin Impact did. Gorgeous graphics and ridiculously flashy combat. Very much like a lot of JRPGs that have been made lately, that have been really good, like Tales of Arise and Scarlet Nexus. Maybe this is a way I could play a cool game at no extra cost. And you know what I say, free is for me. And I get to play it when everyone else does right from the start. Though now that I've actually played Zenless Zone Zero, I don't think you even have to worry about that, since it really is a single player experience. At least from what I've played. So I went around the internet and asked people if I should play Genshin Impact before I play Zenless Zone Zero. Because maybe I'd be confused with the whole system. Maybe Genshin Impact would be a great starter. But after the reaction that I had with the First Descendant, I was about ready to give up on the whole idea of grinding on a game that I might regret spending so much time on, no matter how good the graphics are. And Genshin Impact is over 100 gigabytes, and there was no way I was going to download that much on a game that I might not like. So I said screw it. If I don't like Zenless Zero, then I probably won't like any of these other gacha games anyway, especially if they drag things out, like previous live service games. So I start up the game, and immediately I'm met with this cool cutscene. Wow, the graphics are so good. It really looks like a 3D anime. I like the music, I like the style, I like this whole aesthetic. But I also liked all of these things with the First Descendant. Most of these games have a great start, a beginning that gets you pumped for the rest of the game. And then the cutscene ends. And now it's a comic book. And this is kind of a pet peeve with me. You know when a new console comes out, and studios have to really get a game out there in time for the launch, instead of animating cutscenes, which would take up too much time and money, they'll hire an artist to make comic book pages and use that as the cutscene. It reeks of money savings, and it might be indicative of a game that was hastily made, rushed out because people need something to play on their shiny new console. But I don't think this is the case here. They could have animated all of these cutscenes, but instead chose to make a comic book. Maybe it was a cost-saving measure, since there are fully animated cutscenes sometimes that look really good, but the majority of the game is comic book, and characters standing around next to each other. This was the same thing that I didn't like with Scarlet Nexus. I would rather all of the cutscenes be fully animated, allowing me to enjoy the world fully instead of just some limited vignettes. But, just like Scarlet Nexus initially turned me off, the more I played of it, the more I was kind of getting into it. The story never lulled, and every moment further pushed the story along. And as much as I don't like visual novels, and Zenless Zone Zero is definitely leaning heavily toward visual novel territory, I was invested in the story. I wasn't super excited, because, well, how can you be super excited with talking heads? A big reason I don't like visual novels is because they aren't as interactive as I'd like them to be. From what I've gathered, most visual novels are literally that, a novel with pictures. If there is no way to interact with the world, or at least choose your own adventure type of game design, then I might as well read an actual novel, or a comic book, or watch an anime. It's a big reason why I wasn't super enthusiastic about trying the Persona series. Every time I try and learn more about that series, I find that it's mostly just talking heads, and rarely do I ever find long gameplay segments with combat. But maybe that's the appeal? And if Zenless Zone Zero is anything similar to Persona, as I've read people saying, then maybe I'll give Persona a chance finally. Of course, this all boils down to the story. If I don't care about the story, I won't care about the game. And so I find myself pleasantly surprised that I was enjoying the story in Zenless. As simple as it seems to be, I like the characters, I like the world that they're building, and I like how it doesn't drag its story along with useless side quests and filler. At least for now it hasn't. But I think by the time it does get to that point, I might like the characters enough to not mind exploring the world more in side quests. But for now, every mission has a purpose, to teach you about the gameplay, and to move the story along forward. Even with the comic book cutscenes, I want to know what happens next. 3 to 4 hours in, and I wanted to keep playing, even though I was tired and hungry and the sun was coming up. I couldn't say that about the First Descendant. By that time, I was wondering what was the point, and I realized that I probably won't want to play the First Descendant again. So I deleted it. That gameplay loop just wasn't enough to keep me engaged with the game. Which is also ironic since Zenless Zone Zero has much less actual gameplay than the First Descendant, and probably a lot of other combat-heavy games. This is much more focused on the story and the characters. And as much as I love gameplay, I am the type of gamer that needs balance. I need a story to motivate me to keep playing the game. I need to care. And the only way you would or could care about the game is with some kind of carrot that keeps you wanting to see more. Whether that's a story that you're watching unfold, or a progression system that you move up through to affect the world around you. Racing games are usually light on story, but have you noticed everyone saying that the first Forza Horizon is better than the most recent Horizons? And I really feel that that's because there is no point to the new Forza Horizon games. In the first game, there was a reason to leveling up and to gain rank. You were the underdog racer, working your way up to be the best of the festival. You were making a name for yourself, and the radio stations were praising your victories. Even though there wasn't really a story per se in Forza Horizon, there still was a story. You were the story, and you had a purpose. The new Horizon games lost that. How can you be the very best that no one ever was when you already are the best at the beginning of the game? Give me that Volkswagen Rabbit, not the Lambo. Let everyone in the game underestimate my racing skills while I make them eat humble pie. Motivation in the game is fun, and if it isn't there, then why keep playing? And this may be subjective to anyone that plays. What may be motivating for me may not be for you. You may actually enjoy the drip feed of a story of the First Descendant and games like it. But for me, I needed more than just military missions and defense outposts. Maybe I'll get back into the First Descendant eventually, but it just isn't worth it right now. But back to Zenless Zone Zero. I wanted to know more about the story, and because of that, I was able to sit through endless hours of talking heads and comic book cutscenes mixed in with some combat here and there. It's a game that I never thought I'd actually enjoy, but I did. And I think it's mainly because of the story and the characters. The combat is also very good, and not as button mashy as you've heard, though it is very simple. But the one glaring thing that I really had to get used to in this game was the TV system. This was the section of the game that really disappointed me. You have this incredible world that you're building, and the only way you get to explore is through a proxy that only moves through television sets? You're like the operator in the Matrix, telling your agents where to find the phone to log out. But instead of a computer program, you're jacking into a little Moogle type robot that acts as a guide to scavengers and bounty hunters that like to jump into these dimensional rifts that are scattered throughout the city. So you don't actually run around in the world with these characters, finding enemies to fight along the way. No, these are just mini arenas that are used over and over again. The only type of open world is really just a hub world. Well, a neighborhood in this case, that lets you buy other upgrades and weapons and other stuff. Basically, the game loop is this: cutscene, comic book scene, talking heads, logging into the TVs to move a proxy, and then getting into fights and finishing the mission. Rinse and repeat. And all along the way, every bit of each section is filled with story and voice acting. And as shallow as the game is, nothing ever really feels like filler. At least for now, early on in the game. Of course, this only really applies if you like the characters and the story. If you don't, then the gameplay loop will really get annoying. There is nothing to really keep you in the game other than the story. There just isn't enough combat to justify the grind. So as much as I think this game is getting a bad rap, I don't think people are wrong in expecting more with this game. The advertisements really don't show you what the game is really like. And with other games in this gacha genre being combat heavy, a game that's focused on the characters and the story more than combat will understandably put people off. It would have put me off as well, but for some reason I just got into it. Maybe it's because the story and the characters reminded me of Watch Dogs 2. Maybe it's because I don't play many anime games. Or maybe because I'm starved for a good anime, which I am looking for more animes to review on the channel. Coming soon. But I enjoyed my time with Zenless Zone Zero, even if it is 80% cutscene. At least it's free, right? Honestly, I wouldn't mind if this was a full release game that I could play over and over again offline. Unfortunately, once the servers are down, the game is gone forever. Enjoy your time with the game now, because it's the only time you will. But since I now have a taste of these gacha games, maybe I would like to go back and actually play Genshin Impact, or Honkai Star Rail, Wuthering Waves, even Tower Fantasy. If the story is as interesting and engaging as it is with Zenless, then maybe I'll enjoy those games too. Everyone says that those games are better, gameplay-wise, especially Wuthering Waves, so we'll have to wait and see. Wuthering Waves isn't on consoles yet, so there's still time to check out Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. But for now, I think I'll keep playing Zenless Zero for a little while. Well, as long as I can before the grind becomes noticeable. I really didn't expect to like this game, especially after all the negative reviews, but I'm glad I played it for myself. It's a very different game than I'm used to playing, but that's okay. Not every game has to play exactly the same way, and not every game is for everyone. But if you are on the fence about Zenless Zone Zero, I suggest you try it out for yourself. You might enjoy it more than you thought. And if you didn't, well, at least it's free. Till next time.